Philadelphia, a city known for its toughness, home to champions and challenges. Tonight, the fight to lead this city, your city, comes to this, the one and only televised debate. Mayor Jim Kenney up against two people trying to take his job, Anthony Williams and Butkovitz. What's at stake? Your safety.
It's just crazy that we're still dealing with things like this. You know, nowadays, good people, you know, getting caught up in violence.
Your money.
I have a big problem with the assessment. Every year it seems like it goes up, up, and up.
Your kids' future.
I don't mind paying more if I know that it's for a good cause.
The answers you've been waiting for. NBC10 and Telemundo 62, the AARP of Philadelphia and the Inquirer present the 2019 Democratic debate for Philadelphia mayor. A look tonight at the Comcast Technology Center. This is our home for tonight's Democratic debate for Philadelphia mayor. Welcome to our live broadcast in front of a studio audience in the Ralph J. Roberts Forum. We are just 8 days away from the primary election right here in Philadelphia. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm NBC10's Jim Rosenfield, and we are pleased tonight to have all three Democratic candidates for mayor here with us tonight. And they're standing in alphabetical order from left to right. Former City Controller Butkovitz, Incumbent Mayor Jim Kenney, and State Senator Anthony Williams. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Also joining me to learn where these candidates stand are our two panelists, Telemundo 62 anchor Iris Delgado and managing editor of Opinion at the Inquirer, Sandra Shea. All right, we have 1 hour, and we have a lot of topics to get to, so let's get right to it. Want to remind you, gentlemen, you will have 1 minute for each answer to the questions. Let's begin with this, and it's a sobering beginning. As of tonight, 119 people have been killed here in Philadelphia, the victims of homicide so far this year. That's a 12% jump from this same time last year. I think you probably all agree that's not a trend we want to see continue. Something has to change. So I want to know what innovative approach you would bring to stem the tide of gun violence, and why do you think it would work? We'll begin with you, Mr. Butkovitz.
Well, first of all, we have to stop, and frisk so that we can reduce that war between the police and the community. Secondly, we need to be putting a police task force prioritizing on locating gun houses where I understand you can rent a gun for an hour, and identifying people who are selling illegal guns out of trunks and make it just simply inhospitable in Philadelphia. There's a whole series of other types of interventions that have been in use ever since the 60s when Benny Swans and the Crisis Intervention Network came online. We should be funding job programs, and most importantly, we should be focusing on creating family-supporting jobs in Philadelphia.
Is there any new, innovative approach you've seen maybe in other cities that you want to bring to Philadelphia?
I think we have to have sufficient police presence. We see that in New York. They get anti-terrorism money that Philadelphia doesn't get. But Philadelphia is at a relatively low point in terms of police manpower. We have very low manpower for patrols during many hours of the day. The proposals to create injection sites, for example, will reduce that by several orders of magnitude, and we shouldn't be going backwards in this fight against homicides and violent crime.
So more police on the streets. All right, Mayor Kenney.
Well, we have to. This number is a game that we play with the homicide numbers. Each individual represents a family that lost someone, and it represents a family who's probably going to get locked up for the rest of their lives for killing someone. So we can't lose sight of the fact that these are human beings and that we need to treat this as a human problem. We declared a health crisis. We've marshaled all the departments that deal with this issue, including the police, and it's not just the police that are responsible for this. It's the health department, it's DHS, it's the courts, it's probation and parole, and we've marshaled all them together, and we're working to get these numbers down. One of the problems that we have, frankly, is this state is a crazy gun state, and you can't even get legislation that we pass ourselves that you have to report your gun stolen. We get preempted by the legislature, and we wind up taking tools away from us. So we're working on the ground with people with with lived experience, people who have been away, people who have been in this life, to try to convince our young people the error of these ways and that it's permanent when you kill or you're killed or you kill someone else.
Senator Williams.
Look, spin doesn't get it. We are far from recognizing that all these people are lost. There's a plan the mayor rolled out 2 months ago. Since that time, all those souls have been lost. What we will not do is use policies which do not make it safer. Stop and frisk does not make it safer. It further divides the community. What we also recognize is the police commissioner has said we are doing this on a bubblegum string budget. Since the process has started, since the mayor has rolled out his plans, the community groups that would effectively cut this level of violence have not been funded. So here's what I would do. One, I would declare a state of emergency. Just like we recognize the opioid crisis in America, we need to recognize that homicides in Philadelphia are at epidemic levels. 2, we need to work with the police department to put more folks on a much more diversified population. 3, we need to have a program that represents behavioral health, job training, et cetera, similar to the program started by Benny Swan, curfew centers. And we also need to use technology. In St. Louis, of all places, you can use an app in your house to identify where live shooting is occurring and have the police department respond immediately. All these things are available and seen in other cities across America.
Thank you, Senator. Mayor Kenney, you mentioned declaring a public health crisis, but why did you wait until nearly the final year of your first term to sort of sound the alarm on this issue of gun violence?
Well,
your 5-year plan, the roadmap to safer communities, is what you were referencing. And how is that helping families who are losing loved ones right now? They don't want to wait 5 years.
Part of the issue here is the availability of jobs, of work. A lot of these young people are in the street making money, selling drugs and doing other things, and we don't want them to do so. Expanding our ability to train people for certifications and for licenses so they can get a job that pays a living wage. We have a program out in Southwest Philly in the 12th Police District where the officers are engaging with young folks to try to get them into job training. We've placed about 60 people so far in permanent jobs that keeps them off the corner and keeps the guns out of their hand.
Are we able to respond to these things?
Senator?
Shante Tucker, 30-year-old transgender woman. Paris Wright, 21-year-old father, never got to see his newborn. Lillian Menendez, 35-year-old victim of domestic violence. Samir Walker, 16-year-old freshman in high school. These were not drug dealers. These are real people.
These are names, obviously.
These are names of people who've been murdered in Philadelphia.
Right.
And rather than stereotyping them as a part of the problem, what we need to do is recognize them just like we've done across America and recognize these souls are lost and the promise of them, the possibility of them, and their future has been denied because we didn't come up with a plan before an election year.
I think the mayor referenced that we're talking about real people. I want to get back to that roadmap for just a brief answer, if you would.
Well, do I get it?
We checked. There are nearly 24 short-term action items in your roadmap that were supposed to be up and running, at least getting underway within 90 days. We're past that point. That was March. We checked with the Department of Health, for instance, its injury prevention unit. They've said it's early in the process. We still need to hire a program manager. Are you satisfied with that kind of response?
Never satisfied with the pace of government because it moves slowly at every level. But we are making sure that we're putting the resources in that's necessary to address this problem. It's been about 3 months, so you can't think you can judge this program just after 3 months. And we are heartbroken and angry about the fact that we're 14% higher than we were, and we're working hard every day to get it down.
All right, we want to move on to another.
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead.
I mean, until a couple of weeks ago, the mayor was simply quibbling about the statistics, saying other crime was down, the burglaries were down. Why were people making such a big deal about homicides? Because in many parts of Philadelphia, people have lost loved ones and people dear to them. This is just a statistic here. They put together an anti-violence plan that had no anti-violence components in it. They talked about the intervention programs that I referenced before. They talked about technology that can pick up gunshots after the fact. Nothing about the fact that Operation Sunrise and putting police out in force is a necessary deterrent, and nothing about the fact, as pointed out by the Inquirer last week, that in the last 6 days of every month, because of Kenney's budgeting, they can't even work on homicide cases in the homicide division because they run out of budget money.
All right, your time is up. With all due respect, I want to move on to another signature plan that you put forth. That is the sugary beverage tax. That is your plan to raise millions of dollars to fund universal pre-K, parks and recs programs, improvements to libraries. Yet in an Inquirer poll last month, of those who responded, nearly 2/3 said the tax is a failure. We know the mayor's opponents here with us tonight don't support this tax. We know that. But we want to know what would happen to those pre-K programs and the improvements to parks and recs and the libraries if you become mayor. And we'll begin with you, Senator Williams.
Well, let's start with the obvious. 4,000 children in pre-K is about $19 million. The city just booked a $360 million surplus. I think we can afford $20 million towards pre-K if we really believe in it. Frankly, we need about 17,000 children in pre-K across Philadelphia. Early programs do work, and after-school programs also need to come on board under my administration. The reality is this. The soda tax, AKA, is taxing 4,000 items in stores across Philadelphia. It is removing people who are returning citizens from jobs that they can afford to live in within communities across Philadelphia. This is not a discussion about whether we believe in, providing support in our communities. This is simply the creation of a New York giant, gentrifying, loving, former New York Republican mayor, Michael Bloomberg, and now we know the reason why. He gave him $1 million to support his campaign. He loved stop and frisk, and he loved the soda tax. That's why we have it.
You talk about tapping into the surplus, but is that sustainable? What if we go back into a deficit situation? How would you continue the programs
Well, I
by
would
using the
suggest to you
surplus?
this. One, we're going to have a surplus again this year. Two, we're also going to have about $2.1 billion that we spend in terms of contracting, in terms of nonprofits. I think the Philadelphia government has more than enough revenue to support pre-K and after-school programs that they believe in it.
Thank you. Mr. Butkovitz, what would happen to universal pre-K and the other programs funded by the beverage tax?
Philadelphia has to have a 5-year plan. You're not supposed to be surprised by the budget every year. Mayor Kenney had a plan last year that said the real estate tax would go up 5%. He tried to get it to go up 15%. It ended up going up 10% because of the inflation and the reassessments, which were faulty. He ended up the year swimming in about $380, $400 million. They're using that Meantime, you take the police station that he poured $52 million down the drain and got rid of at 46th and Market, decided they had $180 million to pay for the Inquirer building to turn that into a police station, and all of a sudden he's broke and has to do the soda tax. We all know why he did soda tax. It was disclosed in the federal indictment of John Doherty. It was a pernicious device to punish the Teamsters and people who held jobs who frankly supported Senator Williams last time and didn't have the wisdom to get on board with the Kenney machine and with John Doherty.
Mr. Mayor, do you believe this tax is in fact equitable? And would you consider any other way
I believe
to
this
fund
tax is
pre-K?
equitable. I believe this tax is equitable because you don't have to buy the product. That's the initial issue right there. And if you choose not to buy the product and you buy bottled water instead, the odds are that the same soda companies are making the soda are also bottling the water. So I don't know how there's a loss of business or jobs if people are switching from one product to another. The fact of the matter is that surplus was hard earned. It's not enough for the rating agencies to increase our rating, our bond rating, and we spend a lot of money on interest rates when our bond rating. We're able to turn it from negative outlook to positive outlook with that amount. We're putting $90 million in the rainy day fund. I've been in council. When I was in council, we had surpluses that were under $20,000. I mean, we had negative surpluses at one given time. You never know when you're going to have a recession. I want to be prepared for the recession, and I also want to keep these programs going because they work and they create jobs too.
4,000.
Thank you. We want to move on, and we want to keep going with topics that are of interest to our voters. So I'm going to turn it over now for a question from Senator Shea.
Thanks, Jim. We all know that Philadelphia has a poverty problem. We have the highest poverty rate of the 10 largest cities in the U.S. We have the largest number of people who live in deep poverty. That means $9,500 a year for a family of 4. So what can a mayor do to lower the poverty rate? And by how much would poverty have to decrease under your administration to consider it a success? And let's start with Mr. Butkovitz.
Well, first of all, Philadelphia used to be a city of factories. Some of the elite think that's going out of fashion, that you have to have a PhD and have a technology background to work these days. Philadelphia has got a tremendous port. When I went to the legislature in '90, people thought the port was dead. Right now, it takes 5 days to unload a ship in New York, 5 days to unload a ship in Los Angeles. Studies in 2007 showed the potential for 25,000 new longshore jobs in Philadelphia at $100,000 each job. All you have to do is pass a urine drug test, show up for work every day. The laser focus of this city government should be in attracting the kinds of jobs that will match the people who have been locked out of the employment market in Philadelphia, not in chasing Amazon, not in reducing African-American contracts, not in cutting African-Americans out of jobs in the city government, as this administration has done, and not in instituting a $500 million public works project that they've essentially locked the African-American community out of.
Can you also answer, before you run out of time, by how much would poverty need to decrease for you to consider your efforts a success?
I would say by about at least 30 to 40,000 people.
Mayor Kenney.
Which part of the question do you want me to answer?
I'd like to know what you think a mayor can do in lowering the poverty rate, and by how much do you think poverty
What we can do is what
should
we're
be
doing, and that is
decreased?
investing an unprecedented amount of money into education. We cannot wait for Harrisburg to fully fund our education programs, or Washington to do that. So starting with pre-K and funding, as we're asking for $1.2 billion in new money for our schools, we've basically taken that mantle on ourselves, and we're responsible for our children. So I would like to see a 10% reduction, but you have to remember, this poverty has been on for generations. I've been in office less than 4 years. This is a generational issue, and it's going to take a little while to get it under control. We have done what Mr. Butkovitz says he would do. We did work with the governor, bring in new cranes for our port. We have with the Longshore Union and the Holt Logistics Company setting up a job training facility on the waterfront so people can learn how to do those skills, and we are putting people to work on the port and in other places also that are not necessarily college degrees needed.
Just to clarify, you're saying 10% is a reasonable expectation for the next 4 years, should you get 4 years?
That's our aspirational goal, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, it involves other issues, too. I mean, the help we get or don't get from the state, the help we don't or don't get from the federal government, the president wants to cut health care. I mean, these things could impact us badly if they happen.
Senator Williams.
Really? Point, deflect, everybody else's fault? No. How's he going to decrease it by 10%? He hasn't decreased it by one iota within his administration. So let's start with that. There's going to be a cabinet-level person appointed to my cabinet, and that person is going to be responsible for cutting poverty in Philadelphia by half within an 8-year period of time. We have a policy laid out, WilliamsIn2019.com. Please visit it. The reality is that we have to align our public school education with where the private sector is. We have to work immediately with the private sector to create jobs that are here and support them. We need to invest. I've talked about a concept, a municipal bank, where we take, rather than all of our deposits going to the private sector, we take those in terms of private banks, we return them to neighborhood organizations. We fund them. We fund small business. Look, what we will not do is further tax poor people with soda taxes so that, frankly, they are the ones staying on the bottom. We will find a way to employ them within an administration that has a number of exempt jobs. All those things add up to an employment rate that we will cut in half. If we just keep up with other cities across the city, other cities across America, we would have already had 35,000 new jobs if we had replicated our peer cities across America.
Thank you, Senator. I want to turn it over to my colleague from Telemundo 62, Iris Delgado, for the next question.
Thanks, Jim. Affordable housing, or lack thereof, it seems to be a serious concern for Philadelphians today. In fact, right now, the waiting list at the Philadelphia Housing Authority is closed. Would you consider a form of rent control to give people more options when it comes to housing? We'll start with you, Mayor Kenney.
Yes, we're studying that possibility now, but we're also investing into affordable housing development and also housing stabilization when people's homes begin to deteriorate. We have a housing trust fund that we take money from in order to stabilize people's homes, to keep them in their homes in the first place, and also continue to develop more affordable housing through those investments with those dollars. But rent control is on the board to be looked at. Senator Williams?
No, it would not. It doesn't work. In places where they've experimented with it, it has not been a success. What we do need to look at is the abatement process and the assessment process. How we develop properties in Philadelphia should be in character what the prehistoric, the character of Philadelphia, first of all. Two, it's not just low income, it's also working class folks. The abatement process has gone towards a skewed category of significantly high income people. We need to find a way to support those folks who are working as well as in modest income. And we have the revenue to do that if we just redirect it in a logical way to support most Philadelphians.
You know the largest number of the organization that uses the most tax abatements? It's the Philadelphia Housing Authority. They use the abatements in order to improve the funds necessary to build the housing that they build. And if we eliminate it, they're not going to have that tool to use.
As I would suggest to you this, the pot of money that is most significantly spent is not the housing. They use a lot of in terms of the actual numbers, but this is more the spin and deflect conversation that comes from this administration. Lip service and not substance. The reality is the majority of that money goes towards high retail tax abatements for people who live in significantly high income housing. That's their numbers, not ours.
Your time is up. It's clear you're both in disagreement. Let's give Mr. Butkovitz the
Rent
chance.
control is not constitutional in Pennsylvania. There's a constitutional right to property. I would think by the time the mayor has been in office for 4 years, has a law department that he would know that. What we ought to be is involved in the planning process and the zoning process. Just like we do environmental impact statements before we tear down buildings at gas stations, we ought to be requiring before zoning is approved or before plans are approved, studies on the impact on the indigenous, on the population that is present in a geographic area, and determine whether the valuations and the prices are going to be raised such that they're going to be displaced and moved out of their neighborhoods. There's no reason that we can't have that kind of impact statement. I think we should do the same thing in terms of non-union businesses, supermarkets, for example, that are coming into town, cutting the wage rate over the existing wage rate so that people take credit, the mayor takes credit for new jobs, but they're poorer jobs than what we had to start with.
So that's a no.
That's a no on rent control because we can't do it. I'd love it if we could do it.
Thank you. Philadelphia is facing, as we know, the greatest public health crisis in a century. We're talking about the opioid crisis. Mayor Kenney, this question is directed at you initially. You have said that supervised safe injection sites is a way to curb this epidemic, a way to make some inroads. You've also said multiple sites are needed. So we would love to know, where would those sites be located? Because there has been pushback in one community. And how many do you think should be here in Philadelphia?
First of all, the establishment of these overdose prevention sites is why we need them in the first place, had not been determined yet. The city would not operate this operation. It would be done by a nonprofit. Our role would be to have people there who have access to social services, addiction services, and the like, so we can get people into another space as opposed to under a railroad trestle or down by a railroad line shooting up by themselves and dying. We had 1,217 people die last year, 1,100 the year before, and 900 the year before that. And the thing is, the problem's increasing. But if we could get them into a place that's secure, and if they do overdose, we can bring them back to life, and also get them to a place where they can get the services they need. If they're out on the street in an alleyway by themselves, they're going to be dead.
You've been looking at this, though. How many do you think will make an impact?
We have to be near where the people are injecting.
Is it 3? Is it 2?
We're looking at the one at this point, and that's not imminent. There's no plans for a particular place. This is just studying the legality of it, because we don't know what the federal government's going to do from a law enforcement standpoint, and we have to figure out what we tell our police to do when someone's entering one of these facilities, knowing that they have drugs on them. So we've got some legal issues we need to straighten out.
To you other gentlemen, Senator Williams, Mr. Butkovitz, we know you don't support these sites. So what would you do to fight the opioid epidemic? We'll start with you, Senator.
Thank you. One, I wouldn't put it in Kensington. I would not wait till an election cycle that I'm concerned about what I'm going to be reelected to say I'm not for it. I would actually consider the fact that those of us who recognize Kensington is not the centerpiece of those folks who unfortunately are addicted. People come from all sorts of places. You could put it in Rittenhouse Square and it'd be overrun. But we should be as a leader in this space. And I've talked to many of my folks who are concerned about this issue. We're empathetic and supportive of those who are in the throes of addiction. Let me be very clear about that. But we should be about intervention. We should be about prevention and aftercare. That means early in life, our young people need to understand what these drugs will do. 2, if you're in the throes of addiction, that means you should be able to walk into a police department, fire station, library, any place, and get the city of Philadelphia to say, we're going to send you to a place for recovery. And finally, if you're working for us or contracting with us, we should never desert you when you fall off the wagon. It should be a commitment from us. For those of us who understand what addiction is, it is a lifelong disease that we should be committed to. Those folks who are injecting in a quote-unquote safe injection site, I'm not sure how you safely inject heroin any place in America. I'm not sure, frankly, how you legally can do it without the federal government shutting it down.
Thank you. Mr. Butkovitz.
Mayor Kenney's statement was classic Jim Kenney. He's both for it and against it at the very same time. Look, safe injection sites is an oxymoron. There is no way that you can safely inject heroin, particularly fentanyl-contaminated heroin, without killing yourself eventually. And whether or not you physically drop dead in the center or out in the street or back at the bathtub when you're home doesn't make any difference. What we need to be doing is more beds, more dollars, more outreach, more support for families. It's a dirty little secret in this town that if you have a relative in need and you put your arm up and say, I'll help out, the system backs off from you. They leave you on your own. Alcoholics Anonymous has Al-Anon. We need to be helping people to game plan and brainstorm this issue and work with their loved ones and not just play, pin the tail on the tiger. In Toronto, where they tried this, they took 90 police to create a safe perimeter around the injection sites. We're going to bring drug dealers to the corners proximate. We're going to increase drug-related murders on the street. And we're going to take a quarter of the police on patrol at any one time to create a perimeter around the injection sites while more innocent people get killed in the crossfire.
All right, we want to move on to a question from our partners at the AARP of Philadelphia. Having access to safe, walkable streets seems vital for any neighborhood. Yet in 2018, nearly 50 pedestrians and bicyclists were killed in this city. At a time when we're seeing a push towards, finding a way to reduce congestion. We want more people maybe on bikes or walking to work. What will you do to ensure that those options are safe in Philadelphia? We'll begin with you, Senator Williams.
We're going to work with, one, let me thank NBC and AARP and even the mayor for showing up tonight. Appreciate it. We're going to work with Fifth Square and other organizations similarly constructed across Philadelphia who have plans about mobility. We do need guidance, and we need regulation when it comes to bike lanes and how we operate in the city of Philadelphia. And so I look forward to supporting policies that continue to grow the mobility in Philadelphia logically. Ideas, not only bike lanes, but ideas that support poor folks moving around in Philadelphia, a transfer. Why are we paying extra money for that in the city of Philadelphia when we know it requires a young person to pay something and maybe not get to school? So they have some extraordinary ideas, and some others have some extraordinary ideas in this space, and I plan to work with them going forward.
Mr. Butkovitz.
When I became controller in 2006, one of the first issues I worked on was Roosevelt Boulevard. My wife, Teresa, pointed it out to me that there is no place to cross at the light on Roosevelt Boulevard, and that is the largest area where pedestrians are getting killed all the time. I've had arguments with PennDOT about it. I was editorially attacked in 2006 because it was seen as being beyond my purview. I take this very, very seriously, and I think that we need to do alternatives such as fencing in that venue, such as special short-term bus routes that'll get people. We had people crossing at a church, I think at Ransom Church, 80-year-old people having to dash across 6 lanes of traffic to an island and then another 6 lanes, and people in the state and city transportation departments told me that was an acceptable price, that we were going to lose about 50 people a year because it would be too expensive to do the engineering changes. I got a passion on this issue, and we will bring the same passion to Roosevelt Boulevard and to all traffic safety around the city.
Mayor Kenney.
We are working with the Bicycle Coalition and our streets department folks in order to keep streets clear as possible, sidewalks clear as possible. We've invested about $200 million in repaving our streets. The last administration was down to about 25 miles a year. The industry standard for smooth streets is 131 miles. We're at about 98. And we're catching up from where we were from before. But we work with the Bicycle Coalition on bike lanes, protected bike lanes. We're moving cars from the curb, putting the bike lane between the car and the curb as a natural protection. We have some issues with City Council because there's places they don't want these bike lanes, so they hold up the legislation sometimes before we can get it done. But we're working with them every day.
Thank you, Mayor. Iris.
Thanks, Jim. Late last month, President Trump said he was sending undocumented immigrants from the U.S.-Mexico border to sanctuary cities such as Philadelphia. And Mayor Kenney, this is something you called disgraceful, and we'll get to you in just a minute. But we want to ask your challengers here tonight, what is their take on President Trump to send undocumented immigrants to the sanctuary cities like Philadelphia for what he said was lack of action by Democrats? And how would you respond as mayor? We'll start with Mr. Butkovitz.
Well, I support the city's existing sanctuary city policy. I think this is totally a demagogic political move by Trump. It's obnoxious to have this imposed on Philadelphia, but the truth of the matter is, if those people were sent to any city, the same human drama would be playing out. So I think that we just stand our ground on sanctuary city, and we protect our people.
How would you protect them exactly?
By not turning them over to ICE.
Okay. Senator Williams, how would you respond to the president's plans?
Well, I'm used to bullies, and Donald Trump is a bully. But the reality is his threat to send undocumented folks to Philadelphia is something that, frankly, I would not have quivered about. Just like I support sanctuary cities, if you send people here in a process, we're going to help to get them documented. Most of these people just want the opportunity to be a part of the society. What we do is make it difficult for them to be a part of the society. They do a lot of the work and have done a lot of the work for all of us for generations in this city and in the surrounding region. And so for me, the fact that Donald Trump continues to be what he is only manifested by false bravado, intimidation. And the moment you blink with somebody like that, then you lose. And so the status of sanctuary cities will remain. But most importantly, those folks who are undocumented, we're going to work with them because we have them here today. We need to work with them to make sure that they become a part of the American dream.
Thank you, Senator Williams. And Mr. Mayor, would you say that by not cooperating with ICE, our citizens are safer?
Well, first of all, I'm glad we agree on something. I didn't think it was going to happen at all tonight. We do not turn people over to the police. We don't have our police turn people over to ICE because it wrecks the relationship on the street. And people won't have the ability to make a complaint, to file a complaint, or to be a witness, or if they're a victim of a crime, won't call the police. I believe seriously, this country has existed for immigration over its period of time. It's been a benefit to have immigration in our country and in our city, and I would gladly take those folks, but he'll never send them because I think it's all a bluff.
With all due respect, you didn't answer the question. Are our citizens safer by not cooperating with ICE?
Yes, they are safer by not cooperating with ICE because there's more of a level of trust to report crime as opposed to going underground.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to talk a little bit about economic development in our city. For years, we've heard from business leaders and tax experts, in fact, that Philadelphia's business tax structure has to change if we want to attract and also keep some of our major corporations, our major employers here in Philadelphia. We know Philadelphia has almost 24 tax incentives in place for businesses to offset some of the highest tax rates of any large city in the country. That's just the way it is right now. So, would you change the current tax structure to spur job growth? And if so, how would you do that? Senator Williams, we'll start with you on this.
We're going to make our commitment to the wage tax reduction as they did under Ed Rendell. 2, we're also going to look at the uniformity clause in Philadelphia, which we did, and that is to uncouple your private real estate with commercial real estate. 3, we're going to work with the chamber directly, and most importantly, beyond the chamber, small business folks who are part of the Philadelphia community to establish how they are surviving on a limited ability to move forward. 4, we are going to remove, quote unquote, the sweetened beverage or soda tax because it falls significantly upon those who are consumers, poor people, black and brown folks across the city of Philadelphia. Those basic things we have an outline for. Again, our plan under Williams in 2019 gives a full, gives you a full understanding of a very robust economic plan, which we have not had forever. Lastly, we will also report to council every year our economic development plan so we know the growth before an election cycle arrives.
Mayor Kenney.
Well, we've continued the reduction in wage taxes and business taxes under the Rendell years. The only years that it was frozen was during the Great Recession when Mayor Nutter had to freeze them. The problem with drastic tax reduction is that you're going to have drastic cuts in services. And in a city that is as poor as we are, it's difficult to provide those services if you don't have any revenue. And that's the reason why the beverage tax is important to us, because those services that are being provided could not be afforded to be provided by just the general fund itself. So you have to balance your approach to reducing taxes while at the same time maintaining a level of service that people want.
So you're saying there's nothing drastic that you would look towards doing in your next term?
I'm not drastically cutting revenue because we have to pay for schools, we have to pay for services, we have to pay for trash collection and police and fire. These are things we need to pay for, and to slash, heavily the tax burden will create those situations where we're going to have to cut.
Mr. Butkovitz.
Mayor Kenney's bragging about a wage tax cut this year that was $2.5 million. For somebody making $50,000, that was $5 a year. People in Philly don't make $50,000, they make $38,000 on average. So it was a saving of $3.80 a year. If that wasn't an election year gimmick, I don't know what one is. What the practice of this city the last few years has been to go after one industry after another and cannibalize them. That's why we had severe increases in wastewater rates that have moved virtually every auto dealership out of town. We've raised parking lot rates. Anybody notice there's no parking lots anymore? They're all disappearing. They're building hotels and no parking lots. And the soda tax fits right in that. It's not a question of whether soda companies can afford it. The economics of supermarkets and people who brought those supermarkets into this city 10 years ago so people in the inner city would have access to fresh fruit and vegetables are being insulted. The mayor who's never run a grocery store or supermarket or any kind of business is telling them they don't know how to run a business.
But this is a question to you, Mr. Butkovitz. What would you do to the tax
just
structure?
like doctors, first do no harm. First, let's stop the practice that Philadelphia has of becoming a partner of every productive business, putting up a big sign indicating that we're, at the snap of a finger, we're going to impose a confiscatory tax or regulation on you, and we're not going to meet with you, and we're not going to talk to you, and we're not going to try to understand your problem and solve your problems. When I'm the mayor, our goal is not only to attract business, but to work with the businesses who are here and try to make them as successful as possible.
On this issue of our business community, a law enforcement source has told us here at NBC10 that the business community could and should be doing a lot more than it is to help in this battle against gun violence and killings on our streets, in the form of financial support, support from the private sector to fund innovative programs. So, as mayor, what should we expect from the business community, and what would you do to make that happen? We'll start with you, Mayor Kenney, in your next
Well,
term.
I agree. I don't think the business community does similar to what New York does. And that business community comes up with lots of money to buy equipment and innovative equipment for their police department. I love working with them. I would love to. We're standing in one of the most important companies in the country, in the world, right here in Center City. So yeah, they should be doing more, and we'll work with them to do that.
How?
By asking them, first of all, by asking them for contributions and involvement, and they do. I mean, this company like this provides a lot of help for the community through computer access and the like. But we'll continue working with them and see if we can be successful.
Mr. Butkovitz.
First of all, people like Harold Honigman give millions of dollars to support our homeless problem and the efforts of Sister Mary Scullion. Jeff Brown is employing 600 ex-offenders and providing a career path for people out of prison to real careers in the supermarket. So let me do what the mayor hasn't done. Let me say tonight, thank you. Instead of insulting them and instead of calling them every name in the book and attacking them because they haven't personally gone bankrupt yet over his soda tax idea, I want to get the businesses involved with schools. I want to get businesses paired with schools so that a company like Elliott Lewis has a model program. They have kids come in, they do programs with them, they give them summer jobs, they always hire a few at graduation time. That ought to become a point of pride. It ought to be the thing to do. People ought to have decals on their windows that they're part of the Philadelphia partnership with the schools. And I think that extends to other things. It's just a kind of that Philly shrug. Everything is too much trouble until election year to be talked about here. Absolutely nothing's been done by this administration except to insult those businesses.
Senator?
Well, I got to respond to two things. The mayor talked about cutting services. I don't know what services he's talking about. If you go outside this building today, you're going to find a pothole with your name established to it. If you go to a public school, you're going to find an asbestos-filled building attached to it. He's booking $360 million in surpluses for a rainy day fund, and we're in a flood right now. So I don't know what services he's talking about. I'll also say this. The business community of Philadelphia just simply needs, one, to be asked, directed, and organized. That is not what has happened in Philadelphia. Business owners across the city of Philadelphia, small ones and large ones, will tell you they give millions of dollars every year to our art museums and to schools and the rec. We do not have a report back to them. We have to be honest. I'm a former business owner myself. I know what it means when I give up my hard-earned money and tell my employees to volunteer. So I'm not sure what the mayor said, because one time he was criticizing, one time he wasn't. You need to lead in any of these spaces. This is an example of that. We need to organize our business community in a logical way and report back to them their successes that they support us in.
Want to talk about schools, and for that, I'll turn it over to Senator.
Thanks, Jim. So let's talk a little more about schools. After more than 15 years under state oversight, Philadelphia regained control of the school district with a local board in 2017. Mayor Kenney, you, in fact, appointed the 9-member school board last year. How would you rate the performance of the school board, and what metrics would you be using to rate their performance?
Well, first of all, I think they're doing a very good job, and they've just been there a short period of time. We've had 3 consecutive years of improvement in test scores and graduation rates under Dr. Haidt, and we're putting unprecedented amount of money in the schools, not waiting for Harrisburg to fund something they're never going to fund, or for Washington. So in the next 5-year plan, we're asking for $1.2 billion. That's $700 million in new money for our schools to continue funding these improvements. And the more our schools improve, the more people will stay in our city. And as a matter of fact, I just ran into a guy the other day who moved into Philadelphia from Atlanta with his wife, both engineers, and they chose the neighborhood that they chose to buy a house in because of the quality of the public school. And public school there is doing very good. We need to replicate those good public schools in every neighborhood in our city, so we bring equity to the table when it comes to education.
Let me clarify the question, because I want to ask the other 2 candidates as well. The metrics that you're using to measure the success of the local board versus a state board.
Well,
What impact?
I think the improvement in the improvement of the child's work is what we're going to judge the board on. I mean, if the children are doing better and they're getting higher test scores and they're graduating at a higher rate, that's how we judge the board. I also judge the board on what our interaction with us, because what we've tried to do is to take all the city departments that touch schools, and it's almost every one, to help them get their work done. And I'm very happy with our school board and with Joyce Wilkerson, our president.
Mr. Butkovitz, would you answer the question?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor Kenney's bragging about a 1% increase in graduation rate from 66 to 67%. They've eased the pass requirements in some of these scores. I'm not interested in gamesmanship. I'm interested in real progress. The Inquirer poll just indicated that the people of Philadelphia, by something like a 5-to-1 margin, are dissatisfied with the progress of the schools. I'll tell you how I rate Mayor Kenney's performance on schools. When Mayor John Street lost.
Can I interrupt, because we're asking about the local school board?
Yeah, well,
and the success of
I understand where your positions are, Sandy, and how you feel about this race, but I'd like to explain my own answer. When the School Reform Commission came into town in 2002, Mayor Street outsmarted the state. He got tremendous infusions of state money while holding 2 seats on the SRC out of 5. Mayor Kenney got rolled by Harrisburg. He took back the Philadelphia schools with a $1 billion state deficit that the SRC ran up with no commitment for the state to pay for it. Our kids are paying in diminished services for that debt. And by the way, at the time he took over the Philadelphia School Board, Governor Wolf was the governor, not Governor Corbett. So Mayor Kenney had a great cooperative relationship with Corbett, and he could have controlled the SRC and made sure that Harrisburg assumed responsibility for that $1 billion deficit before he took that back.
Senator Williams.
Thank you. I think it's unfair to grade this current school board. They have been there a very short period of time. But it's kind of clear that public schools of all types, charters, traditional publics, magnet schools are underfunded. And we need to fund them. And so that starts with Harrisburg, certainly, and a reimbursement for our charter schools in Philadelphia, so we no longer have to argue about that. But further, we also have to find a way to fund our public schools without raising property taxes, which our taxpayers are not going to do that. I've identified $150 million in my plan, WilliamsIn2019.com. Please review it. But it's real money, starting with $50 million coming from the PICA bonds, which are going to roll off. We also have to find a way to get young teachers to come back to Philadelphia. So I want to use an abatement-type process to have public school teachers in our neighborhoods as they grew up and they were in mine. And so, I don't think it's so much fair to grade them. I do think it is fair to acknowledge that we have a significant problem in terms of public education in Philadelphia. The gentleman that, the mayor referenced, I'm sure lives in a particular type of neighborhood, but the majority of our children in 4th grade 60% of them are reading below proficient. And the majority of our graduating classes are operating below basic when it comes to math and reading. And so we have to acknowledge that there are some great schools in Philadelphia, wonderful teachers, but most importantly, the system simply is not working aggressively enough.
Thank you, Senator. Let's get back to the issue of safety on our city's streets in Philadelphia. District Attorney Larry Krasner, as we know, was elected on a platform of criminal justice reform. Recently, he dropped his opposition to an appeal for Philadelphia cop killer Mumia Abu Jamal. In an interview with NBC10, the officer's widow accused Mr. Krasner of deceiving her, even lying to her about his plans. Other victims' families have spoken out against Mr. Krasner as well. Do you think the District Attorney of Philadelphia is too soft on crime? And if you do, what would you do about it? Let's start with you, Senator Williams.
I think it's early to say that. I think this DA has come in with some great ideas as it relates to cash bail, reforming a system that over-prosecuted people of color. But I also think there's a common sense conversation as it relates to petty crime that we're hearing more and more about in our neighborhoods. I don't want to contrast myself in opposition to the direction in which he's heading because I think it's fair and appropriate. But I do believe that the loss of Robert Wilson, who's an officer in the line of duty in Philadelphia, sort of pointed a very direct finger at all of us, including him, about how sensitive we are to these matters. Robert Wilson is a guy who grew up about 4 blocks from where I grew up. He's a wonderful father whose family tragically lost him. It points to the fact that those families were not a part of the conversation of the plea deal, which was Reese. So I think we all have to acknowledge that we have work to do when it comes to reforming the system. I think he'll acknowledge that he may need to do better in terms of reaching out and touching folks. But the bottom line is I think it's very premature for us to sort of give a grade, if you will, on the current DA.
You were talking about the officer killed in that GameStop robbery.
Correct.
Thank you, Senator. Mayor Kenney.
I'm not in favor of the death penalty. I don't think it's effective. I don't think it's reduced the number of murders in our country. I think it takes a long time to get somebody to actually be executed, and I think we can safely keep people in prison so they don't hurt anybody anymore, but I'm not in favor of the death penalty.
Do you think the district attorney
I think the
is being fair to victims' families? Is it being inclusive and/or too soft on crime?
I don't believe he's soft on crime. I believe that he should talk to people more, families of these victims more, and have their input. I think that he's, hasn't been a prosecutor his whole career, so maybe he needs to learn some of those skills. But again, I'm not in favor of the death penalty.
Mr. Butkovitz.
I appreciate the work District Attorney Krasner did on criminal justice reform and on cash bail. But I strongly believe in an adversarial system as the way of finding the truth in legal matters. And Krasner obviously does not. It's like having 2 public defenders there and nobody representing victims. It's not just the Officer Wilson problem. It's that man that was crippled because he was shot by an AK-47. And the district attorney told the family he would talk to them about it, and he didn't. He agreed to a very low sentence. It's the signal that is being sent out to the police and the communities all over the city. People in this city are being asked to put their lives on the line to come forward and tell the police if they're aware of any gunplay or any other crime going on in their neighborhood, and then they see the guy walk out the back door because the district attorney is ideologically committed to his lifetime career as a defense attorney. That's not right, and what we're going to get, and what we're getting. We're going to get skyrocketing homicide rates and skyrocketing violence.
Iris?
Thanks, Jim. This next question is from our partners at the AARP Philadelphia. Americans over 65 are the fastest growing segment of the population, and research shows that most of them want to remain in their homes and communities as they age. What steps would you take to encourage the construction and renovation of housing that allows for greater accessibility and independence? We'll start with Senator Williams.
I know something about that. I'm 62 years old, trending in that direction. One, I'm going to work with those who gave me the endorsement, the preservationists in Philadelphia who want to maintain the character of our homes. The majority of folks who live in row houses in Philadelphia, working class properties in Philadelphia, live in those types of property. We need to, one, educate them about the equity within their homes so that when they're being called on the phone by the city, which, by the way, is the largest body that is now taking properties from you, the city, not the private sector. We need to reverse that. So the city is no longer going to be chasing you down for your taxes. We're going to work with you in terms of your taxes so that, one, you can understand you have equity in your property. We want to help you secure it through the city as well. So we're going to work with folks who live in their homes and preserve that class of population. Most of the folks in Philadelphia who are at that age in their life, frankly, are modest income people. The majority of them in Philadelphia are modest income people. So we have to work with them to support them so they can hold on to the properties through their equity, as well as other programs like the Loop program and a variety of other programs, which many Philadelphians are not educated about.
Mr. Butkovitz?
Yeah, I concur that we need to have loan programs, short-term loan programs, so that people below certain income categories are able to fix up their homes. I think we also need to fund organizations like Philadelphia Corporation for the Aging so that we have in-home services. I think that we need to encourage people in their 30s and 40s to buy long-term health insurance and to sweeten that by offering city matches to people who will acknowledge the inevitable of what's going to occur. And I think that we maybe expand the mission of the district health centers to provide visiting doctors and nurses so that people don't have to be treated in just an institutional environment, but get more of the treatment that we used to get in the 60s, where doctors actually came to your house.
Okay, greater health access. Mr. Mayor, please answer that.
We'll continue to expand the resources for the Housing Trust Fund. We'll get more education behind the LOOP program, senior citizen tax freeze, and making sure that we're able to stabilize people's homes while they're in them so they don't have to move out, become homeless, or move in with somebody else. We've been doing that, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you.
All right, these are questions for you individually, so we will start with Mr. Butkovitz. You're 2 years removed from having Philadelphia voters, as we know, reject your bid for a fourth term as city controller. So we'd love to know what makes you think this time around those same Democratic voters are going to elect you to a higher office as mayor of Philadelphia.
I think that there is a wave in Philadelphia for change. And I served 3 terms as controller, and there's certainly been a very big enthusiasm for more women in government. What's different this time is that we have an incumbent mayor who's had a complete failure. What we were able to show in the controller's office is that we can lead, we can manage, even where we don't have the authority to impose solutions. But just in the past couple of weeks, the chairman of the Mayor's Fund for Philadelphia just pled guilty because of investigation originated by us, which the mayor couldn't get off the ground. The former sheriff of Philadelphia, John Green, pled guilty to corruption. We reformed the controller's office into the major anti-corruption institution in Philadelphia. And frankly, I think it'd be interesting to hear when Mayor Kenney thinks that he's run into a situation in Philadelphia that is too corrupt for him to stomach.
Well, the fact of the matter, am I next?
I have another question for you,
good.
especially for you.
Well,
Mr.
the fact of the matter is that Mr. Butkovitz was fired by the voters because he didn't do his job. He was supposed to audit every department every year, and he didn't do that. And when his opponent brought that to the public's attention, they rejected him, and he lost by 17 points. So I think it's his activity or lack thereof is what causes not his loss, not wanting more women in politics.
I understand we're allowed to rebut. If I may rebut, I lost my job because I did do my job. I don't act like Mayor Kenney and ask permission from John Doherty or the powers that be before I investigate something, before I say Councilman Heaton shouldn't run for re-election. I do what the people expect us to do, a check and balance, truth to power. Now, Kenny's taking his cynical, entitled attitude and saying, because I didn't bow to the powers that be and because I didn't win, something's wrong with me.
Sandra?
He didn't mind taking $300,000 or so from John Doherty over the last decade, and my opponent here took $450,000.
Are you attacking that?
Can I say something?
Sandra has a question for us.
Oh, I don't know. I'd like to watch this for a
It's the
while.
hypocrisy. You sit here and you listen to all this, but the hypocrisy is unbelievable.
Mayor Kenney, in a recent Inquirer poll, 21% of voters who responded say they are better off today than when you were elected 4 years ago. About a third say they are worse off, and 43% say they are in the same shape, more or less, than they were when you took office. What do you have to say to those voters who think they're worse off or that nothing has changed under your administration?
We've been dealing with some very serious problems that we've had to deal with since we got into office in 2016. And by the way, the head of the Mayor's Fund was doing her activity when I was a mayor. It was Mike Nutter that was mayor.
The Inspector General wouldn't investigate it. We're the people that took it to where it had to go, to prosecution. You were the boss of the Mayor's Fund for Philadelphia.
Excuse me, this is Mayor Kenney's
He
question.
just did an aside.
I wasn't the boss of the Mayor's Fund. It was Michael Nutter. That's who she worked for, not me. I was in City Council.
Okay.
To Sandra's original question.
What do you say to
I can't just stand here and listen
But
to
that's
this.
not true.
I wasn't
You
the
became
mayor
mayor in January 2016. You've been the boss of the Mayor's Fund for
I'm
Philadelphia for 3
Anthony Hardy
years.
Williams. I'm running for mayor.
Okay.
What do you say to those voters who think they're worse off or that nothing has changed under your administration?
Well, I don't agree with that. I think that we've tackled really serious problems in the city, and they're difficult problems. And we're continuing to fight every day to make lives better for people in our city. Our investment in education is phenomenal, and we're going to continue to improve our rec centers and libraries with the beverage tax, by the way, because that's not going anywhere anytime.
Thank you. Jim?
Yes, this question is for you, Senator Williams, sort of along the lines of what we asked Mr. Butkovitz.
I'll argue with myself, okay? Thank you.
You go ahead. You frequently do win re-election to state office without a challenger in the primary or the general election, but you've never won a competitive race. That is a fact for either governor in 2010 or for mayor back in 2015, losing the primary to the gentleman right there, Mayor Kenney. Why do you think this time is the time. Why is this going to be different?
Well, I have run a competitive race when I first ran for state representative. That said, I've not run, when I've run for statewide office or for mayor of Philadelphia. And I would suggest to you a couple things. One, because I've learned from those experiences that one, we have to listen to people. I will tell you the last time I ran, I had a lot of money from a lot of people. This time I'm running a grassroots campaign, and we made more than a credible outcome. The endorsement of John Street, Brett Mendel, the black clergy, Muslims across Philadelphia, those who are millennial groups, the Preservation Society, some of the unions, for example, CWU, are all people who are attracted to my candidacy based upon the issues that concern us in Philadelphia. The issues that Ms. Shea laid out are issues that should be challenged. And frankly, with all due respect, you can't blame somebody else when you've had 3.5 years to attack them. This issue that we talked about when by the way, the comment is illuminating. When he says that the DA has to learn, no, when the mayor gets hired, day one, people expect an outcome. You don't get a ramp-up time. People dying in the streets of Philadelphia, potholes. The level of misery in Philadelphia has a significant index, especially upon the poor in Philadelphia. So the reality is this. This time, I'm talking in a way that I haven't talked before. Frankly, I'm a lot more open, a much more connected person, and I'm showing up in neighborhoods that I'm shocked the mayor has never shown up in. And so, for the first time, people in Mayfair, in Girard Estates, in North Philadelphia, are connected to my campaigns when people wouldn't expect that to be.
Thank you, Senator. We want to move on to our... Please hold your applause. Appreciate that. We want to move on to our lightning round, a chance where we can look into some major issues, but with single-word answers is what we're looking for here. Mayor Kenney, you appointed Police Commissioner Richard Ross after you were elected. So, gentlemen, we'd like to know what grade would you give the police commissioner for his job performance, A being the best, F being the worst. This is like high school. So A to F for the police commissioner's job. Mr. Butkovitz, we'll begin with you.
C.
Mayor?
A.
Senator?
I lost an election over that. I'm not grading anybody.
Okay, fair enough. So would you keep the commissioner on the job, yes or no?
I got to talk to him first and find out whether the poor performance in homicide is because of him.
Yes or no?
Maybe.
Senator?
Yes.
Mayor?
Yes.
Senator?
Yes.
Thank you. Stop and frisk, hot button issue. More, less, or keep it the same?
Less. None.
Less.
None.
That was none?
Yes. No means no.
Thank you. Charter schools, more, fewer, or the same?
Same?
Fewer.
Senator?
I'm sorry. Who knows? I mean, it's a measurement that the school board will
fewer,
decide.
or the same?
Don't know. I can't tell.
Okay. Gentlemen, we thank you so much for being here with us tonight and answering our questions here at the Ralph J. Roberts Forum inside the Comcast Technology Center. I want to also thank our partners at the Inquirer and the AARP of Philadelphia, and we thank you at home for watching this 2019 Democratic debate for Philadelphia mayor. Conversation's not over. For more analysis and behind-the-scenes moments, you can go to the NBC 10 app. I'll see you tonight on NBC 10 News at 11. Have a great evening.